Hi everybody, welcome back to the Gallowgateshots YouTube channel. As you can see, I'm joined by the one and only, the Athletics, George Caulkin. It's been a long time coming this, mate. I think it's been years in preparation, but it's finally happening.
Years in the making. Yeah, we better make it good. Fuck's sake.
I know it's obviously since lockdown, as a channel, we found it a lot easier to do more things like this because you don't have to arrange. We're physically meeting up with people. And I know a lot of the time we try to get you in the pub when we're doing the podcast from the Ashley pub in South Shields. But obviously, we couldn't find a date where everybody could match dates so we could do it. So we're here eventually. Let's hope it's worth the wait, mate.
Absolutely. We'll make it a good one.
So how are you doing, first of all? It's all good?
Yeah, fine. I mean, you know, you talk about not being able to find time or whatever like that. I mean, I've been checking my diary and there's literally nothing in it. So this is an absolute pleasure to do this. No, and you're talking about meeting at the Ashley pub and stuff like that. That was where our trip to West Brom started from last season, wasn't it? And was that the last away game of the season?
That was
Southampton maybe afterwards, was there?
That was the last away game that I went to. In fact, it might have been the last game I went to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start, mate. Let's start with that trip. So we all met in the Ashley, like we said, in South Shields. You and Taylor Payne were there to do an audio piece, basically. I know it was a written piece in the end as well, but it was a as you go audio podcast as well about a trip away with the Newcastle United fans in the weekend at West Brom. And I think when you walk into a pub early afternoon, well, late morning, and everyone's on the Jaeger bomb shots, you know, you're in for a long day. So what was your thoughts when you first walked in, mate? There's you and Taylor with your expensive microphone and equipment. Everybody else drinking cans of Red Stripe.
Well, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. I'll tell you what, the start of it was brilliant. The end of it was less pleasurable, I have to say. Gillinton's on fire 25 times or 30 times in a row, whatever it was, on the bus on the way back. I think we were all heading for nervous breakdowns at that point. But it's been so long since I've done anything like that as a fan. I was at Goodison a year ago, and I just picked that game completely out of random. I just wanted to write about it, and I couldn't have picked a better game, you know, to do it with those two absolutely god-awful performance, and then those two late Lejeune goals. And then I just thought, you know, Newcastle is still in the cup. That's a rarity in itself, and just wanted to sort of do the whole day job. My one regret is that I was sober, but there is no way I could have got home and then immediately written about it if I'd had a drink, sadly. But I hope, I mean, certainly in the audio thing, I love doing it, and very, very kindly you and the lads gave up your time in the pub. I mean, it was just a hilarious trip. Where was it that we stopped? I can't even remember where it was.
I don't know, mate. It's one of those things where somebody asks that question and I can never remember where we stopped. Hopefully somebody watching can remember.
I just can't remember.
It came up on my memories, on my photo.
Yeah.
And it came up, and I thought, I need to remember that name. Then I forgot it immediately.
And it was brutal because the bus people just left people behind.
Oh, we nearly left Taylor.
We nearly lost Taylor. And then anyway, it was brilliant. And then you get to West Brom to be confronted by that flotilla of penises, blow-up penises. And it was just brilliant. What a great day! And
it was like a hen night in the way at one point.
It was.
I was half expecting somebody to come back at half time with a penis straw.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great day. It was less fun on the way back, but that bus on the way back was there were some sights and sounds and smells.
Torturous is the word I want to go for. Torturous, mate.
Yeah, what happened on that bus stays on that bus.
Right, so let's get down to it, mate. Obviously, it is deadline day today. And personally, I never really keep up with deadline day because nothing normally happens in Newcastle United. Over
Monday, as it's called, yeah.
Monday. I think the last interesting transfer deadline day, well, not deadline day, but January transfer window we had was when we brought about 1 million French lads in. obviously there was Gouffron, Hedora, Sissoko, and there's somebody else who I can't think of that all came in. Debussy, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Sissoko. Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah, Sissoko was those are 4 of them, I think. So today, it's just been obviously announced there that it looks like Newcastle are bringing in the young centre midfielder from Arsenal, Joe Willock, coming in. So it looks like it's going to be an 18-month deal as well, which obviously takes them season and end of next season as well, by the looks of it. Thoughts, not necessarily on the player, but what's your opinion? Where does that leave the likes of Matty Longstaff? Should it be a case where now the club should be looking at loaning him out so he can go in and progress as a footballer and get more game time? Because you would expect with the new arrival coming in, that's going to drop him down the pecking order a little.
Well, you could say the same thing for Sean as well, who's not been in the squad in the last couple of games. Yeah, it's very interesting that it's the one area of the pitch that Steve Bruce has really been keen to strengthen. I mean, this goes back to last summer. He wanted to do it then and wasn't able to. And to try and inject a bit of difference into midfield, he talks about energy and that box-to-box kind of player that he wants. It feels, I mean, the way I feel about it is, it feels slightly less important than it did 2 or 3 days ago, when we've actually seen an amazingly dynamic Newcastle performance. Players playing where you would like to see them play, further up the pitch. Hayden, really, really good in that in that sort of defensive role. So where Willock fits into it, we'll have to see. But you're right, and I mean that's obviously been something that's been bubbling around in the background today. It feels like there's been this big chain of potential transfers lined up, which would have seen Newcastle take Chowdhury from Leicester. They were after somebody from Watford on loan, and the suggestion was that Matty might end up at Watford. That would be a shame in some ways, because he's come into the team and he immediately made an impact when he came back into the team. Came from nowhere, as Steve Bruce said, as if he wasn't in the squad all along, and looked decent. But he's obviously suffered, with some of those bad results, like the rest of them have. Yeah. It's rare enough that we get sort of decent players coming through at Newcastle, and so you want to sort of nurture them and improve them and see them do well. If Willock comes in, then you would have to say that both the brothers are now quite a long way down the natural pecking order. Having said that, Steve Bruce has kind of rotated things such a lot, as he's desperately sort of sought a winning formula, that you never rule anything out. But yeah, I mean, the Longstaffs would be a bit of a concern for me.
Yeah, you're right what you're saying. Obviously, Bruce, God knows how many games in a row. Probably every single Steve Bruce game, we never really see the same starting 11. It always chops and changes, at least by 2 players coming in that starting lineup, which you would expect Matty and Sean to get more game time if that was the case. I know Matty came out not long ago. I think it might have been for NUFC TV that he done an interview for, saying that he was disappointed because he did get a couple of back-to-back games, and he said obviously he was disappointed when he got dropped after that one. But it is a worry for me, as obviously a match-going fan when we can go. It is a worry that we are bringing another player in, another team's up-and-coming prospect, as you would put it, and obviously casting ours to one side. I'm just wondering if that's lack of trust or if it's just Steve was saying, no, I don't think you're as good as what the fan base might see you, and maybe you need more time elsewhere. But then once again, we'll go back to the case where they need game time. If they're not going to get game time at Newcastle United, then they have to go to another club. We saw it with Paul Dummett. Paul Dummett went to Scotland for a couple of seasons, and it done him a world of favours. So I feel as if, as a club, we should be trying to push these players out on loan.
There was an amazing stat. You talked about chopping and changing the first 11. There was an amazing stat from about a week ago. So I don't know where it is now, but Newcastle had made more changes to the first 11 than any other Premier League team this season. And all the other teams at the top of that list, barring Brighton, were Champions League teams. So in other words, those teams, those big teams have got massive squads and have to switch things around a lot because they're in all the big competitions. But Newcastle were top, and that tells you a story, and that story is that there's never been a settled 11 because Steve Bruce has gone from game to game to game, scratching around, trying to find a result, trying to find an 11 that works, trying to find a formation that works. He would tend to stick with it, and then there'll be another crisis, there'll be another bad defeat, and then it kind of starts all over again. But I mean, I thought that was an astonishing sort of statistic. You know, I suppose I'm now digressing slightly, but having seen them do so well at Everton, you would hope that there's something there that he would feel confident enough to stick with now and say, right, this is the way we're going to play. Not to say you can't change things and you can't rotate and you can't bring people in to suit the opposition, but there's properly something to build on there. And, you know, let's hope he sticks with it and decides this is the right way to go.
No, you're right what you're saying, mate, and I fully agree. I think going into that game tomorrow night against Crystal Palace, I'm expecting to see the same starting 11 as to what played against Everton. I don't think there's any injuries that have been. Oh, sorry, Lascelles picked up an injury, so obviously he's going to be missing.
And Fraser's been sick. Fraser's been ill for the past kind of few days.
There's Fraser getting his one game, then off for a couple of weeks. What I did want to touch on, obviously, DeAndre Yedlin has gone to Turkey. He's gone to Galatasaray there. And obviously, he's been at the club since 2016. He spent a long period of his career at this club. And I think what fans, a lot of fans now are turning around and saying, "Oh, it's Yedlin wasn't that good for us." But I think people are underappreciating what Yedlin actually did in his time at the club. He was a pretty solid right back, of course, like every other player. He had his bad games, but as a right back, I think he offered a lot more than what people are giving him credit to.
He had that extraordinary pace, didn't he? Which, you know, was obviously his biggest weapon. I mean, he's been that kind of feels like the eternal quest for the right back or fullback this season has been one of the stories of the team as well. You know, Yedlin coming from absolutely nowhere to come back into the team. You know, he was told he could go last summer and stayed, and they couldn't get rid of him. And certainly until the last sort of couple of days, I think there was kind of struggle to try and get, you know, from his people to get in touch with the club and actually find out what was going on. No, he's been a good servant. I mean, you know, he played a big role at the club in the early days, and that was important. Is he the kind of player that you're going to sort of improve with? Well, I suppose he's gone to Galatasaray. He's gone to a very big club in Turkey. I think he would go with people's best wishes because I don't think he'll ever let us down, did he? And I don't think he's a bad lad. I think he's a good lad. So I wish him luck. No, he's, you know, all those players that have been around over the last 5 years or so have been part of something important. It's not been part of something wonderful or brilliant that we would have liked to have seen, you know, since promotion, but part of something important and part of a good team being used in the sort of, you know, in the sort of most basic sense.
Well, five years at a club, it is a long time for professional football these days, and especially obviously came back. Oh, well, he came to the club at the back of a Sunderland loan move, if I remember correctly. He was at Spurs, loaned to Sunderland. He was involved in a couple of those 3-0 wins as well for Sunderland. But he came to the club, and I think he's been a great servant for the team. And obviously, personally, from my point of view, I wish him well in the future. Always came across as a nice guy, decent lad as well. He gave up a lot of his spare time for the likes of charity work and things like that. So I wish him all the best in the future. What I did want to touch on, there's been obviously a few questions. You can expect some of the questions that are coming in, George, but we'll get onto that later on. Obviously, deadline day today. Have you ever really been deeply involved with deadline day as a reporter, where you're sitting with your phone out waiting for like some updates and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the game is the way we report on it and the way the game has changed has been fairly marked in the past few years. I mean, certainly today, I've not been manning the phones. Kris Woff, who I know you know, is our Newcastle reporter at the Athletic. So he's done the heavy lifting today in terms of phone call after phone call. Poor lad. It's a pretty thankless day because it tends to be lots and lots of phone calls and not much happening. So I know he's pretty weary. So no, not for me. I've taken a sort of step back in the sense that I do write about the big things at Newcastle, and I've written tons and tons of stuff about Newcastle since I've been at the Athletic. But the idea is that I write about other stuff too. When I was at the Times, I always used to think that it was really the day before transfer deadline that was important, because that was the last time you got a chance to put something in the paper to say this is what's going to happen. And that's always a risk, because there's always a chance it might not happen. I don't like the kind of bollocks and bluster and kind of bullshit around the day that it's become this sort of, we're celebrating this incredible excess and things like that. Obviously, it's not been like that this year for fairly obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So it's been a very quiet window and a pretty quiet day, really. But no, I've tried my best to sort of to steer away from the kind of stupidness of it, because it is pretty wearisome.
Yeah, one of the questions I'm going to show it on screen there now. It is from, let's have a look. Yeah, I've lost it. There we go. So it's from Daryl. Daryl says Ritchie could find himself starting tomorrow with Fraser being ill. Ritchie was one of the players who was linked to be obviously going to Bournemouth, and the club have rejected a couple of deals from Bournemouth, or a couple of approaches from Bournemouth, which I'm shocked at. I thought the club would probably let him go. I'm not sure when his contract's up, if he is one of these players whose contracts are expiring pretty soon, because I know there is a handful of them.
No, he signed an extension. He signed an extension last season, I think it was. So that's another kind of interesting dynamic of things that happen at the club. People like Shelby and Ritchie, they definitely had chances to sort of move them on for either a profit or getting their money back. Same with Gale, and for whatever reason it didn't happen. Quite often it was the fact that Newcastle had a very high valuation. The other reason was that at various moments Benitez didn't feel secure enough to let those players go, because he wasn't sure that the right replacements would kind of come in. And then there's been this sense of rewarding them. Isaac Hayden's another one, albeit younger, with sort of improved contracts. But it does sort of leave the club in a difficult position at this point, because they're on big wages. And yes, I think Ritchie, as was the case in the summer, would have been happy to go back to Bournemouth. It's a club that means a lot to him. Obviously, it's the Championship. The challenge is to get them back up. But I remember
last time Richie was in the Championship as well. He should have been Player of the Season. If it wasn't for Knockout picking that up, I thought Richie thoroughly deserved to get Player of the Season that year.
Yeah, I mean, so there's bits and bobs of that, and obviously Newcastle are wanting money for him now. The other problem with this window is that they were kind of obliged to get rid of people if they wanted to bring people in to free up spaces in the squad, and they don't want to spend money for the sake of it. So if Ritchie stays, I'm pleased about that. I don't think I'm being cruel to say he's not the player he was a couple of years ago, but he is still vital. He's still a vital presence in the squad. He's noisy. It's not a noisy team. It's not a noisy squad. He is that Raji, that teams need. So, and the one thing you can be guaranteed about Ritchie is that he won't sulk. He'll knuckle down and he'll get on with it. And he's been, I think if there's any doubt about the club's league position, which, I think a lot of stress has come away since the weekend. But if there's any doubt about the league position, Ritchie is the kind of character you want in amongst it, because he's been there, he's seen it, he doesn't take any shit, and he shouts. And Newcastle don't have enough players like that.
I've had the pleasure of watching a couple of training sessions, one of which being under Rafa Benitez. Me and my brother went along to watch one of Rafa's training sessions, and you're not lying, mate. Matt Ritchie on the training ground is the loudest person there.
Yeah.
Poor Paul Dummett had it in the neck from the second they went on those training fields. All that you could hear was Matt Ritchie just going at it, like just barking at Paul Dummett Dummett wasn't even doing anything wrong.
No.
But Ritchie was up his backside, just shouting and kicking him all the time.
You'd want to chin him, but at the same time, that irritant is really important. I had the pleasure of obviously when we were all in stadiums, and when he came back from injury, God, I can't even remember when it was. Was it last season? I can't. All the years meld into one. Yeah, it must have been last season. And he came back in the team, and there was that mix zone area where reporters can, approach footballers to talk to them, which is kind of one of the things I love doing. Anyway, I had the pleasure of being able to going over to him after his comeback game and saying to him, "Do you know what the word Raji is?" And he said, "Yeah, it means angry wee bastard, doesn't it?" Yeah, spot on. Yeah, spot on. And I did this whole piece about Ritchie the Raji, and obviously you want players to be talented and good, but you also want them to set a tone and the right attitude. And I think if you're in trouble, he's the kind of character you want amongst it.
He's a huge presence, isn't he, in this team?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, I mentioned like the training sessions there, and obviously Rafa being manager at the time. It was great to see Rafa obviously taking the training session along with his coaches there. And I'm guessing you would have seen him plenty of times yourself as well. One of the best things about Rafa, he came over at the end of the session. Obviously, a couple of players came over beforehand. Perez straight over to have a chat with her. But Rafa came over at the end by himself, wearing his Newcastle cap, as he always does. And he came over, and I would say there's around about 8-10 over maximum. And he came over and he said, have you got any questions about the training session? And everyone went silent as if he wasn't even there. I think everyone was just so starstruck basically by Rafa and his presence there. And nobody asked a question, but Rafa Benitez being Rafa Benitez, he went on and spoke about 40 minutes about answering a question nobody asked him. It was fantastic. And I know you've interviewed Rafa on numerous occasions, one not so long ago for The Athletic. Just for people watching, what is it like just to sit alongside him and listen to his stories and his opinions and the way he goes about thinking about the game? Because Rafa, his brain and it's football from the minute he wakes up to the minute he goes to sleep.
It's extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, he's an extraordinary character. I mean, I did a column with him for The Athletic for the first year after he left, and that was great. And so I went down to Merseyside a few times to see him, and which I did just before Christmas. And yes, went across to Spain to see him when he was training there with Dalian. And so I've kept in touch. I had a chat with him last week or the week before. He's a great fella. I mean, he's so intense. I mean, that is the word. You sort of go down on those occasions. I went down with him. I went down with Kris a couple of times. You get there and he talks for an hour and a half, and then you leave and it's like your head's just mashed. Your head is mashed by the sort of detail. When he was at Newcastle, I always said that I wanted to sort of soak it up. I wanted to try and soak it up and remember, because he was such a good manager and he had so many stories, and because he's worked at Champions League clubs and won things and stuff like that, it was a great reminder of the club Newcastle were sort of under Sir Bobby and people like that. And I knew Bobby really, really well, and he became a friend later on in life. But I sort of have that regret that I didn't sort of suck it up. I took it for granted that Newcastle would be playing in Europe all the time, things like that. Anyway, I say I tried to remember it and suck it up. I can't remember what happened yesterday, so it's not like I've done it. But he just has that sort of extraordinary logic, and it's not that he's better at everything than you. It's sort of there is that kind of intensity about him that it drives his friends and coaching staff mad sometimes. I mean, they would tell stories about, what do you like to do when you wind down, Rafa? This is like a famous story now. And he'd said, I love watching Westerns. I love watching spaghetti Westerns. But if you talk to his coaching staff, what they'll say is, don't ever watch a film with Rafa, because he stops the tape, he stops the DVD every 5 seconds and says, there's a continuity thing there, because when that man came across the hill on a horse, the horse was black. And if you look in this scene, the horse is grey. That's terrible. It's like, okay, Rafa, but we're just watching a film. And then he'll say, yeah, but he's walked into that door there and he's used his right hand to open the door. And then you see him in the next scene and he's holding the door with his left hand. That's terrible. It's like, Rafa, for God's sake, can we please watch the film? And that's just what he is. That's the kind of person he is. He's not. I interviewed Isaac Hayden again not too long ago and did this sort of big long interview with him, which I love doing. And he sort of said, the thing with Rafa is that he would literally tell them where to stand on the pitch, and he would tell them and tell them and tell them. And he said you became like robots. And in some ways that doesn't sound fun, but it got to the stage with them where they knew what to do. And so when Newcastle won a match and did really well, and he's got his arm around Jamal Lascelles' shoulder and talking into his ear, I mean, that kind of famous scene that we've seen him do with so many players, he is literally saying, no, you should have been 1 yard to the left when that happened. It's like, come on, we just won a match. But he improves footballers. That's what he does.
So you were there for it was the Times event at the Tyneside Cinema as well.
Yeah.
And it was a sellout crowd. I think the amount of people that must have signed up to become a subscriber to the Times just to get tickets for that event.
Yes,
I was one of them. I was one of them.
Yeah, that's fine.
And Rafa, he stayed for a good hour and a half after that event to not shake everybody's hand because he had his wrist strap on the time. But he was standing there, he was still shaking hands when he with a bad wrist. He was still taking photos, and we were at the back of the queue, and the queue was even extending later on in the night. And Rafa stayed right till the end, and it just showed you how much he got the fans and how much he got the club, didn't it?
And he gave his fee that night. It wasn't, he wasn't being paid thousands or anything, but he wanted to do the event, but he gave his fee to the food bank and things like that. I mean. No, he got it. I mean, it's that sort of old thing, which I think plenty of people have said. The best thing about him was that he gave us hope, and the worst thing about him was that he gave us hope. Yeah. And so when people sort of try and put in context the last 2 years, the last 18 months, that is the context. And, that isn't Steve Bruce's fault, but all these constant comparisons that we've sort of had to put up with, but between the current head coach and the former manager, it's important to make that distinction. Are kind of unfair. It's unfair on both of them. But he came to the club and spoke about the club in very old-fashioned terms for us. I mean, in the sense that it was so completely counter to the Ashley years, because he talked about history and he talked about potential and he talked about the stature of the club and ambition, and used those words that we'd all had beaten out of us, for a decade. And, he allowed people to feel positive about the club. And so that was really, really important. It was really important. But then when he went, for a lot of people, it was the end of that feeling. And again, that's not Steve Bruce's fault, but that is the situation that he walks into. And that is a reality. It's a reality that the club had to give away 10,000 part season tickets last season. Yeah. That never gets mentioned. I mean, I go on about it all the time. People don't talk about it, but this, one of the amazing things about this club has been that sense that we turn up. I say we, I'm talking about fans. Fans turn up, regardless of what happens, they'll always turn up. They'll always be there. They'll bear witness. They may not like what they're saying, but they'll turn up. 10,000 people stopped turning up in Steve Bruce's first season. And that's a massive deal.
Yeah, no, it is, mate. I know the club were desperate to obviously fill those seats, and a lot of supporters took the opportunity for the free season ticket, and obviously didn't give them anyone just to try and have some form of impact. But obviously, it didn't work out in the end. There's one of the questions in from Marty. He's straight in there, to be fair, mate, and he said, "You might as well get straight to the point, George. Can you see Rafa coming back?"
Well, I can see him coming back, but I think a lot of things would have to align for that to happen, and that's timing is one of the biggest things in football, and it doesn't often align perfectly. I can't see him coming back under Mike Ashley. I don't think that's something that either camp would be in favour of, for very obvious reasons. If we're talking takeover stuff, he was a fundamental part of Amanda Staveley's first attempt to buy the club. We know that. He was mentioned in all three bids, specifically on all three written bids, and that they would renegotiate his contract. I saw all those documents. I have them. This time, it was obviously different. When I say this time, I mean last year. It was obviously different because A, Rafa had a job, and B, Newcastle had a different manager. Yeah. And, there were a lot of stories that Mauricio Pochettino was lined up, or that Rafa was lined up, and that just wasn't the case. I mean, it's not to say that those discussions wouldn't have been had somewhere, but there was nobody lined up. Rafa at that point had a £12 million clause in his contract to get out, and that's a lot of money. And, on top of Steve Bruce's compensation in his contract, and although Saudi has a lot of money, it's a club that was going to be run as a business. I mean, that was the idea. So they weren't about wasting money. And although this is slightly ancient history, Steve Bruce, in terms of results last season, he gave everybody respite. He gave the people who were due to come in a chance to wait, get to the end of the season, and then see who was available, and so on and so forth. So, there is now a window where Rafa doesn't have a job, but the thing about that is, A, the takeover hasn't happened, and B, Rafa hates not working. And he took the job in China immediately after leaving Newcastle because he couldn't say anything coming up in the Premier League. He was wrong. He was wrong about that. But that's the kind of fella he is. He wants to work. So I know for a fact he's going frantic now, and he's asking the question every day: where can I go? Where can I go? Where can I go? I mean, he's made some iffy decisions, I would say, in his career. So yeah, I can certainly see him coming back under new ownership, but a lot of things have to align for that to happen. I mean, having spoken to him recently and having seen him recently, I know how much he loves the club and still has affection for it. And again, I'm sure, I know plenty of fans do. I'm not wishing Steve Bruce out of a job. If he came in, he would know a lot of those players, and so there would be an easy thing to do. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's timing, and quite often in football, timing just doesn't work the way you might want it to. So,
because you mentioned it first, I wasn't going to.
Yes, you were, you liar.
You mentioned it first, mate. Takeover. We are a year on, just over a year on, from obviously the news breaking about a potential takeover and a bid being accepted by Mike Ashley by the likes of the Saudis. We'll go right back to the start. You've probably mentioned this plenty of times, but obviously we'll not go into too much detail there, but we'll probably go into a little bit of deal. You obviously done the first, well, I think the only interview with Amanda Staveley. Obviously, you went down to her flat, I think it was, apartment.
3 years ago.
Was that 3 years ago?
Yeah.
So that was the first attempted takeover on that one.
Yeah.
Is that the one where there was the 3 bids on the table? Say this one, this one, that one.
Do you know what? I've still got one of those bids. I should auction that off at some point. It's probably full of sensitive information, so I can't. But yeah, so I got one of those copies. Yeah, and I saw her, and that was the first time that was the second time I met her in person. I actually met her when she'd come up for the Liverpool game. So I met her very briefly that day. And yes, saw her then and kept in touch on and off. I remember at the end of that season, we texted, and at that point it's quite funny. At that point, she doubted, like a lot of us did, that Ashley was a genuine seller. She just couldn't work it out, and the price was going back up to 400 million and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I spoke to her obviously on the record briefly. She was very upset on the day that it all came crashing down last year as well.
Yeah. So Amanda Staveley, she's always been a constant for the last handful of years now in regards to takeover. Her name always gets mentioned in the likes of a consortium coming to be interested or buy the club. Do you think, personally, I'm just saying personally speaking, obviously without any contact with Amanda Staveley there, do you think that this is always going to be the case, that she is going to be there behind the scenes trying to get a deal, trying to get a consortium together? She wants to be involved with this football club.
Well, whether what happens if and when there's resolution to this, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? But I mean, whatever you think about her and whatever you think about the bidders, 3 years, that's 3 years plus. I mean, it's 3.5 years of her life that on and off she's been trying to buy the club. It's not that she hasn't been doing other things, but you have to admire her perseverance. And she was described by sources close to Ashley as a time waster at that first attempt. And whatever the ins and outs of that, she's gone away and she's come back and she's brought one of the richest sovereign wealth funds in the world to come to the table with Newcastle, along with the Reuben brothers, who were involved the first time as well. And she wants to buy Newcastle. She wants to be part of a consortium to buy Newcastle. That's the club that they've identified. All of the stuff that brought her to the club in the first place is still there. Nothing's changed. It has the potential, to grow. It has the potential to be, blah, 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 all of that. I mean, God knows what happens, when we get to the result of arbitration, obviously, which is where we're at now. But I think she was denigrated a lot after the first attempt and was sort of not taken seriously. But I think she has to be taken seriously now. Having said all that, she still hasn't bought a club. So, so I'm sort of now going to argue against what I've just said. But, at some point she has to buy something, and, otherwise it hasn't worked for whatever reason. So,
Well, I think obviously this time around, then it was no fault of, I would say, Ashley, you can say the buyers, but we don't know the full in depth of actually what happened behind the scenes with the Premier League. But it looked like everything was about to go through, and obviously those are rumours, no red flags. Then bit by bit, then the concerns were creeping in there. But there's been a question in there, mate, and it is from Raji Gaji, might be Matt Ritchie. Says, does George think the uniqueness of the club, and more specifically the fan base, will be a good fit for Amanda Rubens and PAF? Obviously, you mentioned there that they pinpointed this club. Amanda Stevie pinpointed as to the club that she wanted to be part of. Did she give any sort of reasoning behind that? Or was it to do with the fan base, the structure of the club?
Yeah, she was led to. She wanted to buy a club. So the way it was told to me, and the way she told it, was that, and the way people around her have told this story, is that they wanted to get a club. That was an ambition, and I think they were quite open-minded about who that might be. I think they looked at Leeds in the past, for example, and she did come to Liverpool that day. To the Liverpool game that day, and sat in the stand, and I think was just blown away by it. And so they've obviously, looked at it over a large number of years now. And, I think for a while, when Leeds weren't in the Premier League, they viewed the chance to make Newcastle the club of the North. That was the phrase that was used to me a lot. There's a big catchment area. It was a club that was desperate for TLC, but has the stadium, has the stadium, needs a new training ground, needs investment, but it's there. It's already there, and the crowds are there, and the fan base is there. So in that sense, it was sort of seen as the last great English giant, I think is how I would...
Yeah.
Well, that's how they put it. It's the last great giant in the Premier League. It's already in the Premier League that could be transformed into something else. It had everything.
The sleeping giant tagline is what the club is often referred to as.
Sleeping giant. I suppose it's the sleeping giant. It's at the Premier League, but then again, it is asleep. It's been asleep for the best part of 13, 14 years, hasn't it? Really, it's ticking over.
Do you think, obviously, on the back of a takeover, do you think, obviously, Mike Ashley, he's never really paid a lot of attention to this club. He's never gave it the TLC, like you said, that it needs. Do you think this season has felt a little bit different because waiting for that decision in regards to what happens with the likes of arbitration, obviously taking the Premier League down that route? Do you think it's him just sitting back and thinking, let's just see what happens now?
I think there's been I don't think it's changed, no, because I think the club is still crying out for TLC. Alan Shearer's now a columnist for us, and he wrote a very powerful column a couple of weeks ago saying that the club needs love. It's desperate for love. I run, the one way I try and keep saying during lockdown is running, and I very often run past St James's Park, and I run past Shearer's statue, and I always go up and touch the bottom of Bobby's statue and things like that, and I run around the stadium, and it needs work, it needs love. It's starting to look really old and tatty, and I think that's it. And I know they've painted the bottom half of some of it around the Gallowgate, but it does need that. And there's a feeling, whether it's inside the club, and they would hate me saying this and they would deny it, but there are plenty of people in the club who just say it's ticking over, and it is a ghost ship. It's not like it's a building and a business that's full and crammed with people trying to push it every day. It's been stripped back and it's ticking over. And I think it feels like that on the pitch. It's felt like that on the pitch for a long time now. And, that it's sort of doing the bare minimum to get by. One of the extraordinary stories of the last 6 months or so is that suddenly Mike Ashley and Newcastle fans have become allies. You know, Newcastle fans are desperate to get him to get out, and he's desperate to get out, and suddenly they're on the same side. And in the wake of the takeover not happening, him coming out and hammering the Premier League, you know, we hear almost nothing from the club in terms of communication. Certainly nothing from Lee Charnley and things like that, and that's its own disgrace. But you know, but we've had these kind of very strangely worded statements that either come from Ashley or the club, but really from Ashley having a go at the Premier League. And so he's sort of become an ally, which is a very strange situation to be in, because the reason the club is in this state of stasis and limbo is because of its owner, but he's become a sort of weird comrade.
Yeah, it's as if like some people are putting a cape on him at the minute, which I find very peculiar.
And you know, this is Ashley's club, this is Ashley's version of Newcastle, and it's not a version of Newcastle that is easy to love, let alone like, because it does feel so cold and it feels so aloof, and it feels like, you know, those people walking away, they did it for a reason. They found something else to do. That is a really, each one of those 10,000 people is a sad who went to do something else is a sad story. And you know, I'm from a family of Newcastle fans, and a load of friends of mine are Newcastle fans, and they, you know, so many people say the same thing, that if you're expected to invest in this institution and invest with a shitload of money and a shitload of commitment and time, you know, the idea of that is because you get something back, and it might be all that might be is a sense of togetherness. It might be a sense of being part of something that's bigger than just you, or it might be a sense of pride. And you can't feel proud of this club at the moment, or it's very, very difficult to.
Yeah, and I know you're a friend of a couple of people from the likes of the True Faith podcast, and Alex Hurst. He was on this one last week. Me and Alex done question answer. Great lad, Alex, and basically summed it up perfectly. Apathy once again, and it seems to happen every single season, but it's different points in the season that this happens. But anger slowly turns to apathy, and I think at the start of this season, a lot of people immediately it was apathy from day one, where interest is being lost, and that kills me as a fan. I know we do these sort of things, so podcasts and channels like this, but personally, we do this to interact with the fans, and because we want the best for the club, we really do. But right now, I know we mentioned Sleeping Giant, but it's not even sleeping anymore. The club feels dead. It does feel dead.
Yeah, I share that. And by the way, and I'm not just saying this, but I should sort of say a word of thanks for what you do. It's you know, I know how valuable it's been to such a lot of people during lockdown, keeping people engaged and informed and entertained a lot of the time. It's a really important thing you guys do, and you do it brilliantly. And you know, I'm a fan, and so you know, I know that, you know, we have a podcast and things like that, and I know that people have said that to us as well. But you do a really great thing, so well done, and carry on.
Thanks very much. Same to you, pal. Same to you. Couple more questions. There's been a few mentions of arbitration. I don't want to go down the path of arbitration. One of the questions does say, what does George know about arbitration? Has it started? If not, when we'll know it has started and finished? I'll twist that question a little bit to you, mate, though. And arbitration, do you think this is a case where Mike Ashley just basically wants money in his pocket to win the case? Or has he gone down that route in wanting to sell the club, push the deal through to sell the club?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, yeah, I mean, Ashley is the one, you should always caveat any conversation with Mike Ashley's by saying, you know, he's the most unpredictable owner that exists, certainly in the Premier League and probably beyond. And so it's very difficult to tell what he's thinking. But no, I mean, in his public statement, or the club's public statement, they announced their commitment to this deal. And the idea is to try and resolve the sort of the biggest pressing issue, which I think everyone has sort of admitted publicly, all sides, which is about that separation between the Saudi state and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Now, that then gets into conversations that I'm sort of uncomfortable with, simply because I'm not, you know, in terms of those massive details. I'd be lying if I said that was something that I'm familiar with. Same with, you know, geopolitics in the Middle East. It's just not what it's not what I'm paid to write about, and it's stuff that I can barely understand. So it's about that, and it's about if they can get resolution on that, then theoretically the pathway to getting the deal done is there. Now there are still loads of side issues, and Kris and I did a big piece with help from Matt Slater, who's very well connected with the Premier League and also knows people at beIN Sport, for example, very well. And we tried to sort of get this sense of where things stand. This is a slightly wider kind of point, but there was still this very strong positivity from buying side, that it will go their way, and that if it does, things could move pretty quickly. And there was a hope that it could be resolved, by the end of February, they said at that point. And that, Staveley is communicating directly with Justin Barnes, the Ashley lieutenant, and that's how they're getting all their information. But, as I said in that piece, their positivity has been there from day one. And so far, their positivity has not been accurate. So we really have to say that. I mean, I'm not saying that to be sort of negative or horrible.
No.
But obviously, at the start of this process, they thought it was going to be a quick process, or 6 to 8 weeks, whatever it was we were talking about. And I can't remember. Did we say that? 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. And they were very wrong. And then on the other side of the argument, you've got the Premier League and beIN expressing confidence in their case. So, we're again at that point where we just have to wait and see what happens. It's an independent. I mean, my understanding is that each side chooses a arbitrator, and then there's an independent one, and they come to a resolution. You can't possibly say what's going to happen, positive or negative, because no one knows. And they do have confidentiality on those discussions. So the piece that we tried to do was try and sort of set the mood music and explain what was happening a year on, as you say. I mean, the one bit of positivity was that this rapprochement in the Middle East between Qatar and its neighbours, between Qatar and Saudi, does leave open the prospect of the Premier League effectively being able to broadcast legally in Saudi Arabia. Now, I don't want to kind of get into all these details, because I'm not comfortable with these details, really and truly. But just taking a step back, and I know a lot of fans have consistently been angry and accusing the Premier League of corruption and all these kind of very emotive and strong words. But I think everybody accepts it's not acceptable. It's not tolerable for one of this country's biggest exports, which is the Premier League football, to not be able to be shown in a territory that is then trying to buy a Premier League club either through its investment fund, and that's obviously where the separation kind of issue becomes very important, and that clearly needs to get sorted out. But there are now signs of that happening. It hasn't been done yet. There were some very positive stories a couple of weeks ago. I think they were a bit premature, but perhaps there's life there. Perhaps there's hope there.
Do you feel as if right now yourself, not just as the likes of a reporter in the Northeast, something which you've done for what, since mid-90s, if I remember right?
94, yeah. 94.
Do you feel as if now, obviously a lot of people were burnt by the previous one, and then obviously which happened on the back of that one where it didn't go through. There was a lot of people who were very confident. I was very confident in the things that we were hearing behind the scenes. Yeah. Do you feel as if now it's easier just to sit back and wait to see what happens, rather than, I know previously working for different newspapers that obviously you have to push articles out no matter what. You have to get those articles out. Do you feel now in your position right now you've got that ability just to sit back and just see what happens rather than forcing anything? Yeah,
and so we very much did that on The Athletic in terms of what we wrote. We were very slow to write. I didn't want to get anybody excited by being premature about it. The Wall Street Journal story a year ago wasn't the start of this story. It really goes back another 6 months and more. I mean, there was a chance before the Saudis got involved. Staveley was thinking that she could get a hold of the club. I don't know how, but before Benitez left, and obviously that didn't happen. You know, we're very lucky at the Athletic in the sense that we can sit back and wait, and you know, and only write when we know something, or you know, when it can't be ignored, or when we have something kind of serious to say. And I think we got that right. Last year, I think I got it wrong on Twitter a lot, because although I was sort of saying I don't want to do incremental updates as stories, I ended up doing that on Twitter simply by answering questions.
Yeah.
And I like answering questions because I like talking and I like chatting. But I became I was like the good takeover fairy. And if I was saying anything that was sort of remotely positive, it was being picked up upon and becoming far more, you know, giving it far more sort of weight than I think it probably deserved. And so I've learned a lesson for that, and I feel bad about that. But I think sometimes, I think saying nothing is incredibly rude, and so I don't want to do that. I want to interact with people on social media. That's what I love doing as a journalist and also as a human being. I mean, what this version of football does not appeal to me at all. What appeals to me is being in a full stadium, messy, giant inflatable cocks, people throwing up, and I want to talk, and I want to laugh, and I want to be part of that. And so I did that on Twitter, and I regret that. I do regret that, but it was a tricky one.
Well, we're seeing the same right now, mate. We're seeing certain journalists, certain reporters on the good side of fans by only putting positive news out. Then you've got the opposite, where there's reporters not putting negative things out, but being very cautious, which is understandable, being cautious. And for some reason, I know Twitter can be an absolute cesspit. It really can. It can be one of the worst places you find yourself, but on the same hand, it can be one of the best places. I've met so many people through the likes of that platform. So it's great. I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't necessarily want the likes of a takeover to go through, especially if it is the Saudis. I know they came with a lot of baggage, which is a whole different thing, which we'll not get into. But do you think fans just need to, right now, they just need to realise that the journalists out there who aren't being full guns blasting and blazing into this one, saying, yes, it's definitely happening. It's definitely going to happen. This is positive, all positivity. You've got to give them a little bit of respect as well to say they've got a reason why they're being cautious, because, like I said earlier, we have been stung, we have been burnt in the past.
Yeah, and, you know, journalists speak to different people. I think we live in such a strange era where, I mean, this is a huge digression, but we've just had a president in America, in the United States, who, if he was presented with a fact, would just say fake news, and millions of people in America would believe him, because he was the president. And fake news has become this thing. But wider than that, we can also choose our news now. So it's not like as it was when I was a kid, where there were 4 television channels and the news was on twice a day, and that's where you got your news, and you got it from a paper, and you just took it, and you had to sort of read everything. Whereas now you can actually decide what you like. You can decide what you want to read. You can block people, and that's a good thing. But you can decide what you want to see and read. And so that's a very strange situation where, you know, if I look at my Twitter feed when there's an election in this country, I know that Labour are going to win, but they don't. You know, they didn't win the last election, but that's because I follow people who are left wing. And so anyway, that's a slight digression. I mean, yeah, you know, someone like Luke Edwards, who's kind of the pantomime villain of Northeast journalists at the minute. So, and you know, he's one of my best mates. I love him, and I don't love the way he behaves on Twitter all the time, and we have big arguments about that, and we have very different views about a lot of things at the club and a lot of other things. But yeah, I mean, his caution last year turned out to be perfectly reasonable. And I mean, this takeover was one signature away from happening. It was the Premier League signature away from happening. I mean, that's unprecedented. We've never had that before. So it was incredibly close to happening, but it didn't happen. And I mean, one other thing that I would say is also about us as fans. And I think it's, you know, I do think there's a responsibility on all of us to sort of try and be a bit more understanding. And as you say, I mean, all the available evidence shows that, you know, the trust did a survey of their members last year, and it was something like, whatever it was, 97% of people were in favour of
I
the
think it was 99.8% or something ridiculous
something incredible. But we also have to recognise that not everybody is 100% in favour of the takeover. Some people might be 90% in favour of it. Some people, you know, might not be quite such true believers. Some people might hear some things. You mentioned the baggage of Saudi Arabia. Well, obviously we're talking about human rights and things like that. Now that causes discomfort for a load of people, including myself. But you know, and it's okay to be 60% in favour of the takeover, but to have questions that you want to ask and to feel concerned about, it's okay to be 70 or 75%. The bigger picture of all that, though, is that the vast majority of people want Ashley out and new owners to come in. And I think sometimes it's almost like we forget that there are sort of all these little sort of disputes and things like that, which is always, I don't know, I think that's always very disheartening. It's a massive cliche, but the clue is in the name of the club, Newcastle United, and we're so powerful when we're united, and it sort of doesn't happen enough.
Yeah, you're right. Just a couple more questions, mate, just to wrap this one up. We've nearly been going an hour there. This is something which I really want to know the answer to, because I've heard the answer to it, but I'm not quite convinced if it is the correct answer on numerous occasions. So Amanda Davies' partner on Twitter, is that him?
Yes.
It is, right? Okay, I'll trust you, mate.
Well, yes, I've asked the same question multiple times, but yeah, it is.
There's been a few times, I think it's Mark Douglas who comes out and overseas, no, it's him, and I'm always quite dubious of it. I'm like, is it? Like,
I checked last year, and I'm told it is. Yeah.
Right, so it's definitely him. Right, so just to wrap it up, mate, in regards to this season right now, where does it leave Newcastle United? Will Newcastle United be a Premier League Premier League team at the end of the season, or could it be a case where we drop into the Championship once again?
Well, I'll give you a very different answer than I would have done 3 days ago. I mean, my God, I mean, that was the first time I've almost enjoyed a game of football for what feels like forever. And I'm joking. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed all of it. So, you know, if they play like that, if they can maintain that, I think Saturday was such a relief. I think it unpressurizes the pressure cooker, and hopefully that's a sort of line in the stand. I mean, they're certainly not safe if you look at the table, but playing like that, I think they'll be fine. I've always thought they'll be fine this season, so I'll stick with it. But, you know, the longer that run went on, you know, it was properly worrying. I think they'll stay up now. But, you know, even if they hadn't won that game on Saturday, if they played like that and lost, I'd have been perfectly happy with that. I mean, I wouldn't have been happy, but to actually watch a game and enjoy it and feel sort of you're watching your team be aggressive and get in the face of the opposition and press them and defend with that aggression was just so good to see. And players across the pitch, Manquillo, Wilson, Hayden was fantastic.
Lewis, really our left back, had a best game wearing that shirt.
And so much further up the pitch. So just give us a bit more of that. Give us something to hang on to. Yeah.
So obviously we're talking about the people in favour of the takeover for the Newcastle United Supporters Trust. It's only £1, so don't forget to sign up if you do want to sign up to that. So Charlotte Robson has corrected with me. It's 96.7%.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Evening, Charlotte. Right. Just to wrap this up on this very final, I promise this is the last one. So it is from Graham Dougal. Says, what's George's take on Graham Jones' appointment and Bruce's reaction to it? Obviously, we're seeing today Bruce does seem, and I wouldn't say necessarily angry, but he's not overly happy that a lot of the plaudits are going to Graham Jones for that performance and that result.
Well, all I would say about that is, I mean, there are lots of sort of different ways of looking at this, but I'm told a few things happened last week. Graham Jones obviously came in. I mean, his appointment was kind of very strange. I mean, in the sense that it gave huge, impact for an assistant manager who was given his own welcome video and all that. Very strange. But he had limited involvement last week. He did take the majority of training, I'm told, on Friday, but it takes far longer than that to set a team up and give detailed instructions about how it's going to play and all that sort of stuff. So I'm also told that senior players got together last week and had their own sort of meeting where and again, this isn't about going above Steve Bruce's head, it was about sort of saying, we're in the shit and we need to take responsibility. And, I think that was noticeable as well, the attitude of the players on Saturday. So I think that was important. I think if the manager gets stick, as he has done all the way through this losing run, I think it's okay to give him credit for a win and a good win. I think that's fine. And, I've seen all the stuff on Twitter saying that was Graham Jones's result and that was Graham Jones's victory. I think that's harsh. And I think you do also have to say that it's brave of the manager to bring somebody in, because it could sort of damage his authority in some ways, and in some ways that's happened in terms of the wider public response. But if something's not working, look for freshness, look for some new ideas, and bring those in. Whether it was 100% his decision, I'm not so sure about that, but he's certainly taken ownership of it, and I think he may have been encouraged to do it a bit, but I think that's okay. That's the sort of adult thing you would want a club to do that's going through a bad run. I'm always
so you mentioned there, you mentioned Bruce could be pulling the trigger himself really by bringing somebody else in. Obviously, there's been rumours there on social media that it could mean Bruce getting moved upstairs to the likes of a director of football role. Could you ever see that happening?
I don't know. I think we're a way away from that. I saw kind of Luke wrote a piece about that, but I think he was sort of saying that was something that could happen as opposed to something that was in the sort of, in the pipeline in terms of happening. I mean, one thing I would say is that I do think it's right that Jones wouldn't come without guarantees about his own position beyond what happens with Steve Bruce. I mean, let's face it, he came into the club at a very, very insecure moment. And the kind of build up that we're given, I mean, I would have no hesitation about saying, if something happens to Steve Bruce in the short term, results go again, or he decides to walk away, I don't think he'll do that for a second. But if that did happen, that Graham Jones is there as the next man in line. I mean, I think that's internally. I mean, I just that's my gut feeling, but it just looks obvious to me.
Yeah, which is worrying to me.
Well, it's a big leap of faith. It's a big leap of faith. I mean, in terms of his track record under Roberto Martinez was very good. He's obviously worked with some really, really good players at Everton and obviously particularly with Belgium. And so he obviously knows how to coach. His record at Luton is less impressive, albeit, he got them up after Nathan Jones did a brilliant job there and then struggled to stay up. But
I just get flashbacks when people say he's a good coach. I get flashbacks of McLaren, and it's not great flashbacks, mate.
Well, and working under a brilliant manager is no guarantee. I mean, I'm not having a go at John Carver, but I mean, John Carver, was a good and well respected coach under Sir Bobby, but management in the difficult situation that he was put into did not sit very well with him, did it?
Yeah, no, you're right, mate.
No guarantees.
I just want to say thank you very much, mate. We'll call this a night. It's been great to have you on. I do apologise to people that have asked questions, but haven't got through them. As you can see, people watching, there's been God knows how many questions come in. I've tried my best to amalgamate a lot of them, try and put everything into one to let George speak on this one. But yeah, thanks, George. Hopefully get you on again soon.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have visions. I mean, this has been quite serious, which has been fine, but I do want to do topless soup eating at some point.
Yeah, mate. So the next podcast, which we'll do, I promise you, I'll get you some soup delivered to your house, mate.
Well, you don't need to do that. I'm not saying I'm going to go topless. I just want to.
No, you're going topless, mate. You're going topless. We're all going topless. We're all going topless.
I'd love to do that.
Thanks very much, mate. If you're watching, don't forget to like the video. We've got plenty more stuff coming this week. We do have the live watch along tomorrow night with the Always Smiling Faces podcast, lads. We've got extra time. We've got Beyond the Lines with Matty. We've got everything. So don't forget to like this video, but more importantly, subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you tomorrow. Not a couple of days. We'll see you tomorrow night. Watch what you're doing. Cheers, George.
Cheers.